Board of Supervisors to order, please. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Please remain standing following the Pledge of Allegiance. Following it will be a moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned annual meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, January 24th, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. And I'd like to request everyone silence their cell phones or any other electronic devices and put them on vibrate as to not be an interruption to the meeting, and I thank you for your compliance. And we'll proceed to roll call. I'd like and request everyone please sign in. And thank you. And I would like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us this evening in the viewing audience, including the public on public access and all those who have joined by calling in for WebEx. So thank you for your interest in county government. And we'll move on to education presentations and or reports. And item B7, we have broadband task force update regarding bug tussle, Serenity, and charter. And the broadband expansion, and by Supervisor Robinson, who is chair of the broadband task force.
Good evening. You know, it's great to be up here. As Chair Gibbs knows, we started working on broadband in Marathon County in 2008. Did a study and began another study in 2018 and found that nothing had changed in those 10 years. And we managed to have an original task force, a 2015 connectivity task force, and we're really relying on the private sector to take the initiative. And we didn't have the results that we wanted because the underserved areas were rural parts of the county with a low return on investment. But there's been a lot of changes in recent years, and I'd like to just highlight some of those changes. In 2020, we began partnering with the internet service providers on grant applications. This was after the broadband task force was created, and we wanted to target northern towns that had less than or northern towns in the county, because at that time we were having problems with frontier communication, and we were talking about that before the meeting. Their landlines were going down, there's no cell service, and people were unable to call 911 or Lifeline, as Supervisor Drabeck was very involved in that. And so we began to say that we'd like to focus our efforts in the broadband task force in those towns, and we partnered with a number of internet service providers, submitted grant applications. Unfortunately, only one was funded, and that was for Wittenberg-Tell on the southeastern part of the county. In 2020, the Federal Communications Commission also began a process called a reverse auction, where they had billions of dollars available to support the efforts of internet service providers, but they had to bid, and the lowest bid or the lowest subsidy won. In Marathon County's case, that was two companies, LTD Broadband out of Minnesota, which on a national level had $1.3 billion worth of awards out of $9.9 billion, in CCO, Charter Communications, or Spectrum, which had $1.2 billion nationwide, were awarded them. LTD was subsequently kicked out of the program because of their inability to convince the feds that they could perform up to it. And what happened is that they had a designated service area coverage where they were to provide gigabyte service. We weren't eligible to apply for other grant applications in that area, so it actually was a detriment to us. But Charter has been moving ahead, and we'll talk a little bit about that progress later today. But they've got 4 years from the award and signing to get at 40%, and we're doing our best to encourage Charter to move ahead. In 2020, with the advent of the COVID crisis, there was a CARES Act, and we received funding through the state of Wisconsin to create some hotspots in libraries. We purchased equipment for the libraries so they could expand their Wi-Fi capability. And we also did fiber runs to the Hatley Library and DC Everest Elementary School. In 2021, the county put $250,000 into the capital improvement budget. It was the first time we put money aside for that. We also received the American Rescue Plan Act 26.3. We have earmarked over $3 million for broadband expansion. That was one of the number one issues that we heard from the public when we went out and they had public listening sessions on that. That year we also partnered with, or submitted an application on behalf of Charter to serve 10,000 plus homes throughout the county. Unfortunately, that was not a successful grant application. And in November of 2021, we joined with 4 other counties to do what's known as conduit borrowing, led by Fond du Lac County, where $70+ million was borrowed at a lower interest rate made available to Bug Tussle for the construction of towers and fiber connecting that. About $25 million of that $70 million will be invested in Marathon County, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Also, in 2021, we partnered with 4 internet service providers on 5 applications, looking at the American Rescue Plan dollars through the Public Service Commission at 100 megabytes down, 100 up. We only had 1 successful award with Serenity, also Wittenberg-Tel in the Norwood Pike Lake area. That work has been completed. In 2022, we began working with the Regional Economic Development Association and North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission on the GeoPartner speed test to try to get information relative to how quickly or how good the internet service was, and we're using that to drive where the county's interests are going forward. Also, last year we partnered with 3 internet service providers, and we had 2 successful awards with Bug Tussle and Frontier, and we'll talk about those a little bit later. So relative to that conduit borrowing, Bug Tussle proposed initially 16 additional towers to be located in the county with fiber running to those. The county received access to all of those towers as part of the deal, and we also received 6 dedicated strands of fiber within their fiber network. And while we are guaranteeing their money, they are making payments, and they've been able to make those payments. And we receive 50 basis points or 0.5% on any outstanding balance into our fund. So it's been a good deal for us. But if you look at the tower locations, we only have the Leather Camp, the tower in Bevent, and the one in Little Chicago hooked up. There are a number of other ones that are currently under construction that should be going online soon. Some are in the zoning process, and a few 4 are still in the site acquisition process. We had hoped that might be going along quicker than what it is. But I think as we learn, there's supply side issues, there are logistics issues, there are a number of issues that affect timelines. The beauty of these towers is that they not only will provide wireless service to the neighborhood, but they'll also, in many cases, be part of the AT&T wire or cellular system, so we'll have cellular service. And when you start thinking that 52% of all data comes over your cell phone versus through the fiber, it's important that we have not only fiber running to the home, but being able to support mobility and react to the dynamic changes in our workday. So it's a good thing for the county. This is where they are relative to fiber and conduit. So they plan, then they design, then they get the permits, then they put the conduit in, and last they connect or they put the fiber in and then they connect it to the residents along the line. Their first priority is to connect the towers, to support the towers and support the Wi-Fi in the cellular service. To date, they have not connected it to any homes. They've made progress relative to fiber in the northern portion of the county. I meet with Bug Tussle on a bi-weekly basis to just go over the progress on that. So if have concerns relative to their performance, please let me know and we'll raise those concerns with them. But again, they've got 100 miles of fiber completed, 125 miles of conduit. They've permitted 135 miles, and they're working on design of 350 miles. They keep expanding this in response to requests from local governments. I know that the town of Wausau has a number of requests and a number of others, and they've realigned the fiber runs to try to accommodate town halls, libraries, and other things. So they've been good to work with. So I mentioned one of the partners was Frontier. They submitted a proposal to the Public Service Commission indicating that they would serve over 10,000 units, businesses and homes. We have pledged about $945,000 as a match to that. Their plan is to run fiber to where they currently have the landlines or the old copper wiring. And that copper wiring is old and it's failing. So I think that they're trying to shore up their existing business, and these dots represent where they intend to go with that. They have 2 years from the date that they signed the agreement with the state to complete the work. The state issued that agreement in December of last year. We are working with them on an agreement relative to when we'll make our contributions to them. Typically, we reimburse. We don't advance money. We want to make sure that the work is done and that we are protected. Bug Tussle is serving over 600 homes in the Cronawater, Gunther, Knowlton area. It's hard to see, but the red line's there. And we are providing a subsidy of $235 per unit. They also requested a loan, a total county involvement of $3 million, along the similar lines of what we did the conduit borrowing for, and we've agreed to that, so we're working on the details. We'll make a loan to them. They'll pay that back, but then they wanted $3 million. We're going to subtract 142 from that $3 million and make that a grant, consistent with what we've done with Frontier. I mentioned the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. This is what Charter bid on and was successful. I know it's not a very clear map, but the blue represents where they will provide over the next few years gigabyte service to the residents. This year they started out a little bit slower than they wanted to. The original intent was to string the fiber from telephone poles. They found that the spacing of the telephone poles in rural Marathon County was too great and that they couldn't string it, and therefore they had to bury it. And they found out that there's a lot more rock than what they anticipated, so it has slowed them down. But they are making progress. In talking with Celeste Flynn, their representative, she's indicated that they are farther ahead with their team here than any place else within their corporation. And we have been trying to keep the pressure on them to move ahead. So they've done some work in Supervisor Pirelli's area, and they're hooking it up. So this information's out there, but we look forward to continuing to work with them. For the Broadband Task Force, we began to look at what's in the works, what needs to be done, and so we can begin to look at where the county should focus the efforts. The blue circles are the towers, and we estimated there'd be a 3-mile radius around those towers that we could cover. The dotted lines are where the fiber is there. The red is the Bug Tussle PSC grant. The area in the southeastern part of the county is where Serenity or Wittenberg-Tell has provided services, and many of the dots in there, the green, are where Frontier plans to expand. What we want to do is take this information and work with it and try to, again, look at where do we really have unmet needs and where should the county be focusing its dollars and trying to drive internet service providers' attention. In the past, what we've done is we've responded to the internet service providers and where they wanted to take us. I think we need to now begin to look at where do we want service to go and where is it critical to get that service out there. So we'll be looking at that, and Preston at CPZ has helped us with this. One of the other tools that's available through the federal government is the Affordable Connectivity Program, where they will grant $30 a month subsidy for internet service, and it's available. This is Spectrum's ad, but it's available through any provider or through most providers, and some that don't get involved in the federal program provide it on their own. So if people have an issue relative to affordability, I encourage them to look at that. I did want to bring to your attention in the past we've complained about the inaccuracies of the mapping process on the federal level. The Federal Communication Commission had adopted a map, broadband service map, and if one person within a census tract was covered, the entire census tract was perceived to be covered, and therefore you had to prove that it wasn't in order to make it eligible for federal funding. They have just recently in November come out with a fabric map. And the problem with that fabric map is that there's a lot of errors in it. But it's going to be used to drive $42.5 billion of federal investments in internet. So it's important that we get the information right. So we were concerned about it. Jerry Klein and I and Preston and a few other people tried to sit down and look at that fabric map. There was the opportunity to challenge. There's an ongoing opportunity to challenge that information and its accuracy. We tried to get access to it, and we couldn't. In the process, there was a January 13th initial cutoff date for comments. We couldn't get licensed in the system, and we were concerned. Like, for instance, the Eau Claire Dells Park was considered served. There is no service. It was by a company that we hadn't heard of. So we wanted to challenge that data, but we weren't able to do a bulk challenge because of the way the system's designed. As a result of that concern, Chair Gibbs and I wrote a letter to the FCC complaining about the process and asking for an extension. We've also had communication with part of our congressional delegation to ask them to support us. They're aware of that problem. We will continue to work on it. We'll be issuing a press release to citizens encouraging them to file complaints and challenge the data if it's inaccurate for their home, and we're going to look at opportunities for us to do a bulk challenge, working with the Public Service Commission and others to make sure that map is accurate so we can get our appropriate share. Again, there's $42.5 billion that's available through the feds. We're going to be working with the state broadband office and the Public Service Commission to make sure that we can try to capture as much as we can of the state's allocation, but there are good opportunities ahead and lots of needs. So that's where we are today. Are there any questions?
Questions for John?
And by the way, the Bug Tussle gives us a monthly report that they are now changing to quarterly, but we will, when we get those reports, provide them to you. That's in the packet. It's that link that's connected to the agenda. So they'll give us those updates, but we'll make sure that all of you have that, so when your constituents contact you, you know what's going on. There's a lot of confusion as to which provider is working in what area. Look at the map for the RDOF or Spectrum, and you can look at the routes for Bug Tussle and get a good idea, and we'll complicate that a little bit with Frontiers ramping up their activities this year.
And Bug Tussle, the staff from Bug Tussle were here yesterday at at a meeting and at the Broadband Task Force meeting, and I was delighted to know that the Evergreen Road tower was lit up last week, and so now I may be able to have broadband. I did a test just this morning. On my current speed, it was 1.3 up and, 1.3 up and 0.93 down. So I was really speedy this morning, but it looks like they got a two-week delay on being able to hook up people. But so that tower just went live. So there's things that are continually changing as we move forward. Supervisor Morash, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering on and this isn't important, I'm just curious. Page 13, where it shows the charter RDOF coverage area where it's in the green, why is there that big gap where looks like there's a lot of coverage and then there's that big gap in the middle?
The bidding occurred in the areas identified by the Public Service Commission that were unserved or underserved. So based upon information at the FCC, they went out for an auction and they created these blocks. And you bid on the blocks. So the FCC must have had some information relative to service availability in those blocks, and that's why there are the holes, if you will. So it was driven by FCC's process.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is, where is the progress of the line compared to kind of the hopes and expectations and goals of Bug Tussle? I think they kind of thought maybe the end of 22, maybe they'd be further ahead. It seems they're behind. Can you comment?
They are behind. We've been having discussions about that. I think that they found more rock when they're laying fiber, and I think they found some logistic issues. We're trying. I met with them yesterday morning and asked for a schedule. We hope to get that and provide that to you. A good number of the towers are either under construction and going up, which is important, but then it's also important they get that conduit and fiber to them. So we're hoping, but we're seeing delays with everyone. It's just not going as quick. There's a lot of competition for labor. There are some supply side issues, although Charter has indicated that they anticipated their RDOF and they ordered ahead, and Bug Tussle did a lot of that, but there's still components here and there that there are supply side issues with. But we hope to have a better schedule soon.
Just to give you an idea, some of the contractors that were putting conduit in front of my home, again, was a charter project. Those contractors were here from Illinois. There was another contractor that was in the town of Marathon. They were here from Utah. So I think that's part of the challenges is the companies. There's so many dollars that have been allocated to the United States for contractors to put in conduit and put in fiber, that they're in high demand. And I think the companies are running into challenges finding the availability.
With the PSC grants, they've got 2 years, and with the RDOF, they've got a longer period, I think up to 10.
10, yep.
So we're trying, we are working with them and talking with them on a regular basis to try to keep the projects moving, but they're really in control.
But I think in comparison to where we had the progress for 10 years, which was virtually nothing, and compared to where we're at now, it's 180 degrees difference. So, other questions? Okay, we will move on to a presentation on the responsibilities of county board members pertaining to open records requests. Corp Counsel Michael Purner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Got a slideshow here. Some of this might be, I guess, a refresher or a reminder, but this is just going to kind of a quick presentation on focusing on requests that are directed to you as county board supervisors. So just some reminders and best practice type things. So the first piece is a reminder from something that we mentioned at orientation and just something that's in public records law, which is as an elected official and a county board supervisor, you're the legal custodian under public records law of your own public records. So what that means is that public records law puts on each of you the responsibility for deciding what's released in response to a request that's made to you, and also you're responsible for retaining public records. So the liability that attaches under public records law attaches to you if a request is made for your records. Talk a little bit about the request process. So you've seen a few of these come through, and generally if there's a public records request made to the full county board, A lot of those start with our county clerk, and the clerk forwards those to all the board members. Your receipt of that request triggers your obligation to begin identifying responsive records. I think it's important to note that the clerk is not the custodian of your personal records, so even if the clerk has forwarded a request to you, the clerk isn't the one who's responsible for responding. It's still incumbent on each supervisor to ensure that there's a response being made. And I guess I want to emphasize, I'm here to help. I am counsel for the board. I want to help you all comply with public records law. That's part of my job. But I can't do it all for you, especially if there are records that you have that I don't have access to. So that's where ultimately I want to help and make sure that you're compliant with the law, but I also have to rely on you to help me help you. Public records requests that are made to you as individual board members have to be made to you directly. So you may see a request, for instance, if a request is made to me, I'm going to tell them, please direct your request to the individual board members, because I'm not the custodian of your records. I don't have your public records. I don't store them anywhere, and you're the legal custodian, so you're responsible for the responses. Either a request to the full board or a request to you as individuals. Again, I'm willing to help you and assist you in responding. Emphasizing, though, that the burden of responding is on you. So my role and how I help is typically I try to help you identify responsive records. If you have questions about whether something is a record or not a record, our IT staff can help with running your emails that are on county servers, but they can't obviously do that if you have emails on your personal emails or text messages, things like that. So that's really important to note, that if you have a broader request for correspondence that includes things outside of your county email, I don't have access to it, so I can't help much there. If you get a public records request and you need to take some time to respond to it, which happens a lot, it's important to send the requester an acknowledgement of their request. I'm, again, happy to help here, and I try to do that when you want me to. Certainly happy to reach out and keep people updated so that there's not a question of, hey, why aren't you responding to this? I will need to rely on you, though, if you're compiling records that you have, I don't know how long it's going to take unless you tell me how long it's going to take. So again, help me help you. Again, I think I said this at the orientation, this section is not meant to scare anyone, but I want to emphasize as counsel for the board, there are certain penalties related with not complying with public records law. First of all, the requester can contact the DA in the county to bring an action to force you to turn records over. If the DA declines that, the requester can file that same lawsuit on their own. The court can order you to release records. The costly part is they can also order you to pay attorney's fees and award punitive damage if your denial of their public records request was arbitrary and capricious. So, boils down to, we have an obligation to provide responses to public records requests. We also have a duty to retain public records. So it's important to remember, don't destroy any public records. That's a felony. Very bad, don't do that. If you've received a request, you also can't destroy the records, so if you receive a request, please compile the records, don't destroy it. And just a highlight on records retention laws. So there are record retention laws, and if you have public records, that includes your personal text messages that relate to county business. So I have my personal cell phone and I'm texting another supervisor about county business. There's generally a 7-year retention period. So the county isn't archiving your personal cell phone, so it's on you to make sure that you're keeping those records. I am always available to answer questions about public records. I love to answer questions about public records. If you have general questions, I'm happy to answer them now. If you have specific questions or want to talk through scenarios, I strongly recommend to talk to me after the meeting, arrange a time to sit down. I'd be happy to do that. My goal is to make sure you all are following the law and feel protected and supported in these processes. I want to do the best that I can to help, and I want to make sure that the process works for you, but I also want to emphasize your responsibility. So that's what I think I did. So any general questions, I'm happy to answer.
I guess the one general question, if I get an open records request and I don't have any emails that relate to the request, am I still required to correspond with the requester or through your office?
So it helps me if you tell me that you don't have responsive records. If I've corresponded with you and you want me to help in responding and then you don't follow up with me, I'm going to assume that you don't have any responsive records. If you specifically tell me, that makes me feel a lot better that I'm not assuming. So my preference is if I'm helping you respond to a request and you get a request, let me know if you don't have records. That just helps me keep track. It helps me know that everyone's responded. It just is very helpful.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Again, I had asked the Corp Counsel to provide this because we've had a series of open records requests, and just to ensure that everybody is responding in the appropriate way and the appropriate time frame, and it's ultimately your responsibility to respond to those open records requests. So, any other questions on open records requests? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to standing committee chairpersons or designees. Any reports by standing committee chairpersons? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item C, and that is the consent agenda. Item C10 B through C10 through item C15B. What is your pleasure, and does anyone request any items be removed, voted on separately? Supervisor Ritter.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I would request to make a motion for items C13, B, and C to split the vote.
I think the first would be the request to move it to be separated from the consent agenda, and then we will take motions separately after the remainder of the consent agenda is separate. So I understand your request is to remove items 13B and 13C?
Correct.
All right, 13B and C has been removed to be voted on separately. Any other requests? Okay, what is your pleasure on the remainder of the consent agenda? There's a motion by Vice Chair McEwen and second by Supervisor Seefeld. Any discussion on the remainder of the consent agenda? The remainder of the consent agenda includes items C10, 11, 12, 13, 13A, 13D, items 14A, B, C, 15A, and B. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of that, proceed to vote.
Mr. Chair, my iPad's updating right now, so I cannot vote on my iPad.
And if you want, the clerk will take your vote,
Yeah. Yes.
and that is recorded. And we'll proceed. And the motion is cleared and passed, and it is unanimous. Now we will move to items 13B, the WVLS Board appointment. Just a second, I need the clerk to add into the open meetings the two separations that were requested. Okay, we've got a motion by Supervisor Rosenberg and a second by Supervisor Lazy. Any discussion? This is on the WVLS board appointment. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we will proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And we are down to number 13C, Library Board appointments. Items for the library is item C13C. Motion by Supervisor Robinson and second by Supervisor Leahy. Supervisor Shafinsky.
I would ask that the question be separated.
There's a motion to separate. Is there a second? Just a second, I'll have the clerk put in the motion, so we have record of it. I'm going to request for some clarification from Supervisor Shafinsky on the motion. The motion to separate is to separate all three of the library board appointments
That is correct.
and vote on each one separately.
Yes,
And,
please. Thank you,
okay,
Chair.
I will also have the Corp Council inform the board about each of the appointments and the result that if those board appointments are rejected, that who those board appointments will actually take place for, and who will retain or will continue to retain on the library board and continue in that capacity if the board chooses to vote those down.
Sure. So until a new library board member is approved by this board, the previous holder of the seat continues. So that's based on a recent Wisconsin Supreme Court case that applies to the same statute that applies to library board members. So if any of the library board members were not approved, whoever was in that seat previously would continue until this board approved a replacement.
And each of the supervisors, or each of the individuals are replacing specific individuals on the library board. So Supervisor Book would be replacing Supervisor Van Cray, and Supervisor Jacobson would be replacing whom?
He would be replacing Mr. Jeff Campo.
His term expires at the end of this year, 2024, and then Leanne, 23, and then Leanne Padrak would be replacing the other citizen member, and that term expires 2025. And so is Supervisor Shafinsky made the motion, Supervisor Ritter with a second, and Supervisor Langenhan with the request to speak. Oh, excuse me, it is not debatable, and so the motion is not debatable, and so we will proceed to vote. Just so everybody's clear on what we're going to be voting on, the motion is to separate, and we would have a separate vote on each of the individuals to the library board, and so a yes vote would separate those individuals and have separate votes. A no vote would leave the three appointments in one motion. Is everybody clear? And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried to separate, and then I will have the clerk put in each of the three individuals as a vote separate. Brad would be second and Brett would be third. Okay, first up will be Supervisor Becky Book, again to replace Supervisor Van Cray. And there is a motion by Supervisor Leahy and seconded by Supervisor Cavelli. Is there any discussion? Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very quick. Moment of rebuke, if you will. It's interesting to me that when I made a similar motion back in December, that the motion failed 16-16 to divide the question. And now miraculously here tonight, the process has shifted that we divided the question. All I ask from this board is that we be transparent in the processes that we have set forth. And right now, this is not very transparent. For the record, I will be supporting Becky Book for her appointment. Thank you.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I only wanted to make a comment about one of our supervisors who doesn't have access, Mr. Vensky, Supervisor Vensky. I don't know if he's voting. Is his vote being recorded? Okay, thank you.
It was just temporarily while his thing was being rebooted, so now he's back on. Okay, Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the spirit of transparency that Supervisor Langenhan asked about, the reason why I made the motion to separate is that I had received a number of emails from constituents asking for that. So I was just responding to our constituents.
Any other discussion? Okay, we will proceed to vote. A vote aye will confirm Supervisor Book. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And next we have Supervisor Leon Podrock. And just a second before I get a motion in a second, that individual, the clerk has to make adjustments to the open records. And we will proceed. Motion by Vice Chair McEwen and second by Supervisor Robinson. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried. And we'll move on to the appointment of Brent Jacobson. And Supervisor Mask with a motion, second by Supervisor Hardinger. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. And we are now down to we are down to resolutions. Item E, Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee approving the 2022 budget transfers from Marathon County Department of Appropriations, Resolution 3-23, item E16 on your agenda. Motion by Supervisor Leahy and second by Supervisor Robinson. This does require a 2/3 majority vote. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. And we'll move on to item F, Environmental Resources Committee and Human Resources and Finance and Property Committee. Approval of the use of environmental impact fund fees for the use of updating the Marathon County Groundwater Plan. Resolution 4-23, item F17 on your agenda. And the motion by Seefeld and second by Vensky. Supervisor Sandalski.
Yeah, I just had a question. So this groundwater testing, is this going to be 100% on a voluntary basis?
Yes, I mean, there is a plan to try to get systematically, the addresses throughout the county, so we have a pattern to cover the county, but it's still going to be voluntary on the individual's behalf.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. We have item G, Solid Waste Management Board and the Environmental Resources Committee, and that is approving the amending siting agreement between Marathon County and the town of Ringgold for Bluebird Ridge Recycling and Disposal Facility Phases 6 and 7. And we have with us this evening the solid waste interim director, and so I'd ask him to come up and give us a brief explanation, because this was not on the agenda as of last Thursday's meeting. So, Mr. Hagenbuscher, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to give a brief update of what this really means. So to ensure disposal capacity beyond our current landfill, which would get us to about 2026, our solid waste department has been working to establish phases 6 through 8, which would get us another 15-year site life. The Bluebird Ridge Recycling and Disposal Facility, so it would be a contiguous westward expansion, about 34.5 acres, encompassing about 5.2 million cubic yards of additional airspace that would continue serving all the communities in Marathon County. So pursuant to Chapter 289, Marathon County and the town of Ringgold negotiated this amendment to this agreement. The negotiation was actually mediated by a representative from the Wisconsin Waste Facility Siting Board on September 16th, 2022, and both parties agreed on all terms when we left the meeting that day. The purpose of the negotiations like this are to establish environmentally sound and economically valid solid waste practices, and also provide consideration for concerns of nearby residents and also the affected municipalities. So the following would summarize the terms of this agreement. Item 1 would be the host fee. So we're seeing an increase of 5% per ton cost. So from $2.03 up to $2.13 per ton. We would then see a committee, it's an environmental monitoring committee, if you will, an operational overview. So we would have 3 individuals from the solid waste be represented, and 3 individuals from the town of Ringgold would be represented. And we would get together once a month with one extra person that would sort of be a mediator. And it would be in terms of trying to increase transparency and open up the communications pathway so that the Ringgold residents can understand better what's going on at the solid waste facility, so that there's no lack of understanding there. The sociological impact payment is the next portion of this. Sociological impact payments would be an aspect of what the committee would actually do. The committee would figure out how sociological impact payments would be distributed amongst the different property owners, and we would use a map that we worked with Scott Williams Appraisals on back in 2014 to actually evaluate that impact to the nearby neighbors. That would be $30,000 for each of 10 years, totaling $300,000 in total, all coming from the solid waste funds. The last item is signage. So a big part of what we do is obviously take waste disposal trucks, but we've been finding that quite a few trucks are accessing our facility by using roads not that they're not designated for. they're supposed to be using Highway 29 to access this facility, not cutting through town roads and thus causing an additional nuisance. So signage would be put up, and it would be enforcement would be under the town of Ringgold. So I'm open to answering any questions at this time.
Okay, any questions for the Solid Waste Management Director? Supervisor Cavelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you explain what a sociological impact is?
So sociological impact payments are essentially, obviously there's some level of risk and nuisance associated with, a proximity to a certain landfill and a depreciation, somebody's value of their home. So that sociological impact payment is essentially compensation for having to, live next to the landfill.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we have thank you, and we will then proceed. We've got a motion by Supervisor Mask and second by Supervisor Ritter. Any further discussion? Okay, we will proceed to vote. And we're getting better. We will proceed. The motion is unanimous and is approved. Thank you. We are down to item G was pulled from the agenda, and we are down to miscellaneous business, announcements and/or requests. H19. I have several announcements. First, the Eastern Towns Association meeting is tomorrow evening at the town of Plover. There's a light lunch at 6:30 p.m. The meeting starts at 7 p.m. And then we have the Western Towns Association meeting on the following day, the 26th. Now that is in the town of Berlin. That starts also at 6:30 with a light lunch meeting at 7. The clerk needs signatures from ERC, Executive, HR Finance, and Solid Waste Management Board. Any other announcements and/or requests from the board? Okay, we are down to the infamous item number 20. What is your pleasure? We have a motion by Supervisor Vensky and seconded by Supervisor Langenhan to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.